everyone, welcome to the Hopewell Museum. My name is Alantha Carter and I'm a member of the Board of Trustees of the museum. The study of history always begins with this question: what's the story about? And this is the story about Hopewell's iconic tomato factory building, home to the current Tomato Factory Antique and Design Center. It's also, of course, you guessed it, the story of tomatoes. In fact, this mild-mannered black and white illustration of a tomato is a story within a story. So make sure you stay to the end of this video. The tomato has been a favorite fruit, vegetable, of New Jerseyans for a very long while. In fact, in the 19th century, tomatoes were an important crop for the New Jersey farmers who routinely canned tomatoes and other produce for their families. And starting about 1850 to about 1925, New Jersey developed an extensive commercial canning industry, with business owners and farmers investing in local factories to more efficiently reach larger markets. The Hopewell Valley was no exception. For example, the Pennington Canning Company operated from 1902 into the 1930s, and the Titusville Fruit and Vegetable Canning Company operated from 1889 to 1905. But did you know that our small town of Hopewell, New Jersey was also home to a thriving tomato canning industry? This building at Somerset and Hamilton Streets does not have the name the Tomato Factory for nothing. In fact, the Tomato Factory building operated as a canning company for almost 60 years, from 1892 to 1952, through 4 different companies, before finally becoming an antique center in 1964. It all began in March of 1892 when Hopewell business leaders had an organizational meeting to create a canning company. They named their canning company the Hopewell Valley Canning Company. This book, The History of Commercial Canning in New Jersey, written by Mary Sim in 1951, has a detailed description of the beginning of the Hopewell Valley Canning Company. The Hopewell Valley Canning Company, consisting of some 60 stockholders, decided upon April 2, 1892 as the date of the beginning of their new company. An earlier organization meeting had taken place March 12, at which time the name was selected and a decision made to locate at or near the borough of Hopewell, Mercer County, and the objects decided upon to purchase and can and otherwise preserve fruits, vegetables, and corn, and to sell the same, to buy lands and to erect buildings thereon, buildings and machinery for the purpose aforesaid, to issue bonds secured by a mortgage or mortgages upon the property and franchises of said company, and to sell the same for the purpose of raising money with which to build buildings and machinery and otherwise carry on the business. And so the Hopewell Valley Canning Company was born. The company operated something like a co-op for local farmers with 60 shareholders, including business investors and farmers from Hopewell, Pennington, Amwell, Woodsville, Skillman, and Stoutsburg. By April, the company had selected and purchased the 1-acre site and hired an architect to design the building. In May, the company selected a contractor, William F. Drake. In June, the steam boiler was installed, and in July, additional equipment and supplies were purchased. And by August, the company was in operation just in time for the tomato harvest. The Hopewell Valley Canning Company became a very important part of the Hopewell community, and the Hopewell Museum has a number of wonderful objects associated with the factory that really bring the story to life. One unique item is this cast iron lion's head embossing desk press. It has a lovely logo that reads, The Hopewell Valley Canning Company, Incorporated 1892, Hopewell, New Jersey. Another unique item is this letter from H.L. Holcomb to J.M. Dalrymple. It reads, Dear Sir, will you please get out your correspondence with the wholesale groceries in regard to the product of factory? Would like to get at our next meeting some idea of what the prospects are ahead. Yours, A.L. Holcomb. Another exceptional object we have is the original book of minutes of the canning company. The minutes record the creation of the company and list the various presidents, board of directors, and stockholders. The Hopewell Valley Canning Company was a success from the very beginning. In the first year, 86 acres of tomatoes were grown, 571 tons were received at the factory, and 215,400 cans were packed. The tomato canning industry in the late 19th and early 20th century was interesting in that most factories, including the Hopewell Valley Canning Company, only operated during the tomato harvest season, which typically ran about 6 weeks a year from early August through late September. According to statistics in the Hopewell Valley Canning Company annual reports, during that short season, the Hopewell factory would take in about 350 to 680 tons of tomatoes and produce a total of 140,000 to 300,000 quart-sized cans of tomatoes. To keep the business running at full speed required 50 to 75 employees, the majority skilled women who needed to quickly peel the skins off the tomatoes by hand. These ladies would also hand-pack the cans. These women were experts. In fact, the Hopewell Valley Canning Company's 1910 record for peeling by one person was 330 quarts in one day, and all for 3.5 cents for peelers per pail and $1.25 per half day for canners. The packing process for the tomato factory was really quite fascinating. Farmers delivered crates of tomatoes which were stacked on the east side of the receiving platform. The tomatoes were then washed and scalded for peeling. After that, the tomatoes were carried to the peeling department by the half bushel, where they were peeled manually with a paring knife. The women would then manually pack the tomatoes to the top of the can. The cans were closed and the tops were soldered on, leaving a small air hole. In 1915, 12 cans could be closed a minute, and with a new machine in 1935, 35 cans were closed in a minute. Tomatoes were then cooked by placing them in steam boilers. The air holes were sealed, and the many thousands of cans were piled into bins. Cans were labeled, boxed, and shipped. The Hopewell Valley Canning Company continued operation for 45 years, through World War I and into the Great Depression. But by 1938, the Hopewell Valley Canning Company had come to an end, and the tomato factory was bought by the Quarryville Canning Company. In 1943, the building changed hands again and was owned by the Urban Food Company. The tomato factory certainly was a Hopewell fixture. There were cooking tomato odors at canning time, not to mention the occasional child falling into the waste vat, as well as a scarcity of workers during World War II. And the following World War II and Tomato and Hopewell vignette comes from Dean Ashton's Hopewell newsletter that was distributed to the Hopewell folks in the armed forces throughout the war and then expanded into Ashton's 1947 book, Be It Ever So Humble, covering hometown life and experiences in the armed forces during the war. An emergency call for tomato pickers came to the Hopewell Elementary School a few days before Jack Frost finished off the crop. Help was needed to harvest the crop on the Joe Svetten farm near Ringo's. School Principal Whitecraft gave permission for pupils to work a half day if they made up their class work. About a dozen volunteered. They were paid 10 cents a basket, but when some grew a little weary and began to throw tomatoes at other pickers, a fine of 10 cents was imposed for everyone caught in the act. That wasn't adequate in one case, and one boy had his face washed with a tomato as a further penalty. A few years after the school children helped pick tomatoes, the tomato factory had a new owner. In 1947, the Hopewell Sun Packing Company replaced the Urban Food Company. However, after the war, the New Jersey tomato canning industry was facing competition from Florida and California with their longer growing seasons. And in 1951 and 1952, the contents, building, and land of the tomato canning factory were advertised at a receiver's sale and a sheriff's auction. Then, Reynold Dansbury, a foreman at Rockwell Manufacturing in Hopewell, bought the tomato factory and operated a machine shop in the middle part of the building. He did subcontract work for Rockwell, making parts for the Rockwell gas meters. But by 1962, the tomato factory building was home not to tomatoes or machine parts, but to antiques and better quality bath accessories. Maurice and Marianne Browning had become the new owners of the building, and after extensive renovations, they opened the Tomato Factory Antique Center in 1964. After starting the Antique Center, they founded Maurice Browning Incorporated, which had quarters in the south end of the building. There they manufactured a variety of bath accessories, which were sold at department stores such as Lord & Taylor. In the ensuing years, the Tomato Factory building has remained an antiques cooperative and is now known as the Tomato Factory Antiques and Design Center, featuring 18 small businesses offering a wide range of fine antiques, handmade products, collectibles, and design services. The Tomato Factory story is about an industry, building, and tomatoes. But when you come right down to it, at the heart of the story are the workers, mostly women. This object, one of our favorites here at the museum, taken in the 1920s or 30s, features Hopewell Valley Canning Company employees smiling amongst the tomato crates. Are they happy because they made extra money to support their families? The day was over? It was fun to do an important job with friends? They just loved tomatoes? We'll never know for sure, but we are indebted to them for being a fascinating and very important part of Hopewell's enduring history. But as I mentioned at the start of this video, we can't have a tomato factory without the tomatoes, specifically Livingston's Paragon, as we see in A.W. Livingston's seminal book on tomatoes and the tomato industry, published in 1893. It was the Paragon that was grown for and processed by the Hopewell Valley Canning Company. And the Paragon was no ordinary tomato, as we shall see. A.W. Livingston, born in 1821, was a true tomato pioneer. In fact, he was the father of the modern tomato. Before Livingston, tomatoes did not have the consistent shapes we recognize, didn't taste that great, and weren't convenient for canning. And that's where the Paragon came in. It was the first perfectly and uniformly smooth tomato ever introduced to the American public, or, so far as I've ever learned, the first introduced to the world. In color, it is a blood red. It has a strong, vigorous stalk, heavy foliage, and is a very hardy plant. This discovery, like all the others, soon produced a revolution. As a general field crop, tomato culture had been of little general interest up to this date. To be sure, Mr. Harrison W. Crosby canned and sold the tomatoes as far back as the year 1848, but that which caused it to increase phenomenally and rival the potato as a profitable crop to grow was the discovery of the Paragon and the universally smooth varieties that followed it. The Paragon was a big deal, as were Livingston's other tomato varieties. In fact, they were grown all over the country, including New Jersey. A.W. Livingston mentions Hopewell by name in his book. The West Jersey Packing Company of Bridgeton and Chamberlain and Company of Mercer County are among those who discontinued work during the year. Among the new factories was the Hopewell Valley Canning Company at Hopewell. There are many characters in the tomato factory story: women, men, buildings, machines, and tomatoes, and now it has come to an end. But maybe not. You too can grow your very own Paragon and begin a new tomato story.